Hello everyone, it's Dr. Sam. I'd like to welcome you to my EyeClarity podcast. This is a show that offers cutting-edge information on how to improve your vision and overall wellness through holistic methods. I so appreciate you spending part of your day with me. If you have questions, you can send them to hello@drsambyrne.com. Now, to the latest EyeClarity episode. Hey everybody, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is Dr. Sam, and I want to welcome you to my EyeClarity podcast as part of our summit series. You know, the Whole Health Summit is coming up very soon. We've got a few spots left. The dates are January 14th to the 16th, 2022. You can register on my website, on all my social media sites. Anyways, today, we have one of the featured speakers, and I love what she is putting out. Her name is Lisa Dymond, and just a little bit of backstory about Lisa. She's a speech language pathologist, and she's passionate about the impact of communication and supporting healthy relationships. So I want to bring her on. Lisa, welcome to the program. How are you today? How's it going?
Hi, Sam. Thanks so much for having me, and it's going really well.
I work with a lot of speech language pathologists in the field of autism and ADD, and but you are kind of an amazing practitioner, and I want to introduce you to my community because we want to know how you got into this, and what is your philosophy and perspective, because it's really quite unique. I really love what you're doing. So share with us how you got into this, and what your philosophy is.
Well, thank you so much for that feedback. So starting with how I got into this, my original background, excuse me, is in anthropology and sociology. And just being interested in human behavior and human relationships on a bigger scale. And I always maintained this interest in languages. And so after that, I traveled a bit, saw the world, and explored different cultures. And it was my mom who said, what about speech and language therapy? So sure enough, I looked into that, and the nature of the work on a relationship-based way of working with people. And it was a perfect way to apply that interest in human relationships with languages and communication. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, so relationship, this is like critical, right? So can you say a little more about how you spotlight relationship in what you're doing with people?
Yeah, there's so many different ways I could answer that question. And what comes to mind, at least for purposes of our conversation today, is, language and communication there's receptive language and expressive language, sort of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And from a receptive point of view, what we understand, right? How we listen, how we use our talking to listen to other people, actually, and so that as we're listening, the other person feels seen and heard. Mm-hmm. That's one part of it. The expressive part, it's everybody is expressing themselves, whether it's a child in the womb, whether it's an infant that's babbling, whether it's somebody who's using a device to communicate or eye gaze, or whether it's people using spoken language. We're all expressing ourselves. And are we really communicating? And are we really communicating with each other in a social way, so that we ourselves feel seen and heard? So this way of looking at communication, of receptive and expressive language, seeing and hearing the other, seeing and hearing ourselves. That ties together the reciprocity of that experience, supports relationship in a way that brings this reciprocal dynamic to the relationship, that supports the health of the relationship, the nurturing of the relationship, and how the relationship can be sustained over time. What is it that makes us want to come together again and again and again, and keep that relationship going, so that we have shared memories, we have shared stories, we can reminisce over time, whether we're in a classroom group, whether we're in a family unit, and considering the summit that's coming up, the relationships we have with our healthcare providers, they're amongst the relationships that are very important, especially when we consider that the people who are helping us maintain optimal health, well-being, we want them to be our allies in that. Yeah, so that's, grossly speaking, that's the foundation for how does language fit in to support that and the development of that. Make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. So thank you for that. That clarifies it for me, and I think for the audience. I just want to say again, this is Lisa Dymond. She's a speech language pathologist. She's going to be one of our featured speakers in my Whole Health Summit. And so I want to, I don't know whether you can do this, but I know you work one-on-one with people. So what's your first session like? What are you doing, an analysis? Are you just listening? What goes into how you figure out how you're going to help somebody?
Oh, I love that question. I love that question because it's orienting to the whole path, really. Often when somebody is seeking services, they might be self-referring. They might come because of a parent. They might be referred through a teacher, for example. And initially there's an assessment process, right? To figure out what's our path going to be? What are the goals? What are the intentions? What's our purpose for working together? And informing that there's a very broad way of informing it. Yes, there are standardized tests that are often used because they provide concrete measurements, and in some instances that's helpful and useful. But more to the point, the context is really important. If it's a child in a family, what are the family's goals as well with that child? What's the bigger picture that we're going towards when we're looking at the parts of a therapeutic plan? And most importantly is in my mind, is the dynamic piece of where is an individual starting with the skills that they have, and where are they going from session to session? Like within a session, like from beginning to end, how did we achieve that success? What did it take to achieve that success? And then from session to session, what are we doing to maintain that? So that's the dynamic part of an assessment, where a person is compared to themselves. And in my mind, that's where the most validity is, really, to benchmark progress that way, a starting point and progress that way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's wonderful. And when you take on, say, a family or an individual, what is the arc of how long you're going to work with them? What are some of the benchmarks you're using to see if they're making progress? How do you see that?
Again, there's a broad way of answering that. Part of that depends on the setting for service delivery. Some speech paths, there are specific constraints for how long, of course. If some people work in blocks, for example, so that more students can receive the opportunity of having therapy. And it can get complex when it gets into sort of systems of delivery that way. Ideally, though, it's when those goals are set, the progress towards those goals. Are we meeting those goals more of the time? And what would be the next step? Where are we going with the next step in that? Part of my own practice too is a lot of self-rating scales. So a person's own subjectivity, their own subjective point of view on their skill set and their progress, because you know, from the inside out is really how we build the quality of our lives. Is what am I bringing to this, and how do I feel about what I'm bringing to this, more so than you know, an external validation or an external reward. It's got to come from the inside out. And so really leaning into the conversations that indicate ease, indicate success, indicate accuracy according to that person's own point of view, and the broader application of those skills in their relationships. So you know, speech and language is very bottom up and top down, meaning we've got the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of speech production, the mechanics of swallowing, the mechanics of acoustics, and you know, how we use those to build vocabulary and sentence structure and complex sentences, and put those together into narratives and conversations. But then we've also got the top down, which is, again, what's my purpose here? What are my hopes and dreams for this conversation? What are my hopes and dreams for this relationship? And right, and so then we're applying those nuts and bolts skills to the arc, as you used in your question, to the bigger picture, the bigger purpose and intention.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. And, you know, it's partly the way I work as well. And you bring in a really great point of healing from the inside out. And so many times, you know, I get frustrated with the rehabilitation field and some of the therapists out there where it's so external, learning a splinter skill or a certain outer technique, and they're not looking at it from a developmental point of view or a holistic perspective. And also self-awareness and self-discovery, where you get people to start becoming aware through a checklist or however you're doing it. That's so important, because how are they going to know there's changes if they're not, you know, reflecting on themselves and where they want to go and what they want to do? So it's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on to the summit, because it is very much in line with how I think about things when I'm helping people with their vision. And so it's really great to hear somebody out there like you doing that. So I just want to say to my audience, this is Lisa Dymond. She's a speech language pathologist, and she is a featured speaker at our coming Whole Health Summit. So now we're going to get into Q&A, and some of my listeners and followers have sent you some questions. This is going to be fun. And so the first question is actually from a mom who I work with in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her name is Debbie, and she has an 8-year-old Asperger's boy named Drew. I know Drew, worked with him. And she says, I have been told that I am very emotional about my son and his condition. Lisa, how do you think my emotional health affects Drew?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Remind me, Sam, how old is Drew?
He is 8 years old. He's been diagnosed with Asperger's, and you know, he's got some developmental delays going on.
And what's mom's name?
Debbie.
Debbie.
Yes.
I love Debbie's question, because she really is dialing into the experience of co-regulation, so to speak, or another way of saying that is her own emotions in the field with her son, and how, you know, this dance that's happening. So when we are communicating, to communicate in a way that helps us feel like we're communicating in a way that brings our nervous system to a place of rest, or in a zone of rest. impacts the people that we're communicating, our communication partners, right? And so Debbie's question is, could you repeat her question for me specifically?
Yeah, she's makes a comment. I have been told that I am very emotional about my son and his diagnosis. How do you think my emotional health affects Drew?
Right. Yeah. So Debbie's emotional health is part of what Drew would be picking up on, so to speak. It's part of this co-regulation dynamic. So the more Debbie can notice what she's noticing in herself, and the more Debbie can use her own strategies, again, from the inside out, the more that will have a regulatory impact on Drew as well. Does that make sense?
Great. Yeah, that's going to be really helpful to her. And I kind of think it validates what I've said to her and others. So that's really great feedback for her. So great.
Sam, I think one more
All right.
thing.
Okay, sure.
Well, fundamentally, the outward perspective of course, this incredible care and concern for Drew and compassion for Drew, and how am I impacting Drew is sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? That's the external reflection of what could be going on for Debbie. So to just pause for a moment, for Debbie to just pause for a moment and give herself the compassion and the self-love to bring her perspective back inside. And before looking at the impact on Drew, look at the impact on herself. And that's where, learning some strategies or taking a path of learning to figure out what it is for Debbie's own self that helps her soothe and calm her nervous system. And then think about the reflection that will come back through Drew. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, we're going to move to our next question. This is Chelsea from London, England, from the UK. And so she's been following me for a while, and I told her about you. So this is Chelsea. I'm quoting, I saw in one of your posts, you talked about how we are creatures of attachment, and it gets formed in early child development. Chelsea goes on, she says, I'm an adult now, but I was a premature baby, spent 2 weeks in an incubator before I could bond with my mom. How do you think this has affected me?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is a big question. And I really thank Chelsea for noticing that information out there and taking it inside and wondering about that. Certainly, again, this is a very broad topic. I would really offer at the outset that there have been two very influential teachers in my life. And of course, Chelsea can contact me. Of course, Debbie can contact me too if they want further conversation about their questions. But I do want to mention Myrna Martins, who is
I know her.
You know her? Yeah, she's
Yeah.
in Nelson, BC, and she's just a marvelous, she's a family therapist. She integrates a lot of somatics, and what I've learned most through Myrna is the pre and perinatal psychology piece.
Oh yeah.
So right, like it's huge. What is happening in the womb, and the experience of the mother becoming the experience of the child in the womb, depending on the mother's reactions to all kinds of things, and what that child inside sits with. And then once the child is out of the womb, I would also really credit the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who is a psychologist in Vancouver, BC. And he, a lot of people talk about attachment styles, but Dr. Neufeld has a way of he's synthesized, 40 plus years of clinical experience and all the theory that's out there into his own characterization of the roots of attachment from birth to 6, how when those roots of attachment are really well formed, or when we get to develop those roots of attachment, we can actually come to rest in our relationships, learn to play, and then from there we emerge as adaptive, integrative adults in the world. So back to Chelsea's question, and how that early experience impacted her. It's there are many factors that would have to come into a conversation about that, certainly. So only to say it's worth understanding. It's worth understanding that for her.
Absolutely. There's just so much around the bonding, at that stage, especially when the newborn is so bonded with mom, and there's oxytocin that's produced, and there's all kinds of hormones that are being, energetically exchanged. So I'm sure Chelsea will be contacting you, because it is a big imprint that probably is affecting her relationally.
Well, and given that early time, that birth to 1 is the time where we gain our attachment through proximity, right? Through hearing the sound of our caregivers, from seeing our caregivers see us, from smelling them, from feeling their touch on us. And so to have the absence of that is something to consider at that point in time, right? And then how to move forward given that self-understanding.
So we're here with Lisa Dymond. She's a speech and language pathologist, and she's going to be one of my featured speakers at the Whole Health Summit. So we're coming down to the end of our time today. It's just flown by. We're going to do one more question, and this is from Julie, who lives in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And she's asking you, what is the difference between a sensation and an emotion?
Oh, I like Julie's question too. I would say, and there may be many different points of view on this, so let me say that first. In my mind, a sensation can come from, any of our body systems, first of all, and that sensation can drive us to an emotion as in to move the energy of that sensation. And then from there, I think Julie's question lends itself well to sort of the next part of wondering, which is the meaning that we give that movement of energy that comes from the sensation, namely a feeling. And that's where language is the picture.
Exactly.
Right. And then moreover, that how we use that language to name the feeling that might be coming from the emotion that came from the sensation, and speaking that into conversation with the people that we're with. So we've got a way of naming our experience and sharing that with another person through language that I mean, there's incredible work out there on emotions. Lisa Feldman Barrett is somebody who comes to mind, where when we really understand that we might all experience categories of emotions very differently, it allows us to get very curious about what somebody is experiencing on the level of feeling and emotion and sensation, without making assumptions that how I experience a sensation and the meaning that I give it would be the same as anybody else. And so in relationship, when we allow ourselves to speak that, allow whatever level of vulnerability is tolerable or can be cultivated in that relationship, to use our language to express that part of ourselves as well, there's an incredible trust that can flow from that, and a very deep way of being seen and heard when we can use language, apply language in that way. Starting going right back to sensations.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So, Lisa, how can people get in touch with you? Give us your contact info.
Right now, people can get in touch with me with just my basic email address, which is my full name, Lisa Dymond, LISADYMOND, and then the letters SLP for speech language pathologist @gmail.com. That's the best way to get in touch with me right now.
Okay.
They can also go to Instagram, and it's Lisa Dymond Speech Pathologist on Instagram, and send me a direct message there as well. That's another way.
Great. Okay. I know people will. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your presentation, listening to you at our Health Summit. And I wish you the very best. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for the opportunity and the invitation, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something from the EyeClarity podcast show today. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify and leave a review. See you here next time.